November 1943. The rain had stopped only minutes ago, but the jungle was still dripping. Every leaf, every branch, every inch of earth seemed alive. I imagine myself standing with a group of exhausted soldiers somewhere deep in the Pacific jungle. The air is thick, heavy, and almost impossible to breathe. Night has fallen, and darkness presses in from every direction. No lights, no movement, no sound, except the distant insects and the quiet fear inside every man's chest. The Allied patrol believes the area is clear. For days, their radio operators have detected nothing. No Japanese transmissions, no signals, no messages. To them, silence means safety. But they are wrong, because somewhere in that jungle, Japanese soldiers are not silent at all. They are listening. They are coordinating. And they are doing it without being heard. This is the story of a weapon that made no noise, fired no bullets, and left no smoke behind. A weapon so quiet that Allied intelligence doubted it even existed. A weapon that saved countless Japanese soldiers' lives, not by killing the enemy, but by hiding from them. This is the story of the Japanese invisible radio. As a military historian, I have spent years studying loud weapons, guns, bombs, artillery. But the longer I study war, the more I understand one simple truth. The deadliest advantage is not firepower. It is information. And during the Second World War, radios became both the most powerful tool and the most dangerous liability on the battlefield. By 1942, the Pacific War had become a nightmare for Japanese forces. They were fighting across thousands of islands, dense jungles, and endless oceans. Supply lines were stretched thin. Units were isolated. Commanders were often blind, unable to see what was happening beyond a few hundred meters. Radios were supposed to solve this problem, but instead, they created a new one. Every time a Japanese unit turned on its radio, it risked death. The Americans and their allies had become experts at radio interception. They could listen to enemy transmissions, locate the source, and call in airstrikes or artillery within minutes. A single careless message could destroy an entire unit. I have read captured Japanese reports that describe radios as death beacons. One officer wrote that transmitting a message felt like lighting a torch in the dark and waiting for the enemy to shoot at it. Japanese commanders faced an impossible choice: communicate and be detected, or stay silent and lose coordination. Messengers on foot were slow and often killed. Telephone lines were easily cut. Large radios were too powerful, too visible. Something had to change. And so, quietly, Japan began working on a different idea. Not a stronger radio, not a clearer radio, but a radio designed to disappear. The engineers who worked on this project were not trying to outmatch American technology. They were trying to avoid it. Their goal was simple: create a radio that could operate below the enemy's awareness, a radio that whispered instead of shouting. The result was a new generation of compact, low-power field radios. Today, historians often group them under names like the Type 94 and later modified infantry sets. But at the time, soldiers simply called them lifesavers. These radios were small enough to be carried by a single man. They used very low transmission power, sometimes less than a single watt. To put that into perspective, many Allied radios used 10 to 50 times more power. The Japanese set sacrificed range for stealth, and that sacrifice was intentional. Low power meant the signal did not travel far, but it also meant the signal was incredibly hard to detect. Allied direction-finding equipment needed strong, continuous transmissions. These radios did not provide that. Japanese operators were trained to send messages in short bursts, sometimes only 2 or 3 seconds long. Frequencies were changed regularly using pre-arranged schedules. Antennas were kept low, hidden in trees, or laid along the ground. In the jungle, this made all the difference. Radio waves behave strangely in dense terrain. Trees absorb signals. Moisture scatters them. Hills bend them. Japanese engineers understood this and used it to their advantage. Their signals blended into the natural electromagnetic noise of the environment. To Allied listeners, there was nothing there. And yet, Japanese units were coordinating night attacks, ambushes, and withdrawals with incredible precision. I have studied battle reports from New Guinea, where Allied patrols walked straight into prepared Japanese defenses. Commanders could not understand how their movements were anticipated. There were no intercepted messages, no warning signs. Only later did they realize the truth. One of the most revealing incidents occurred in early 1944. An Australian signal intelligence unit had monitored a jungle sector for weeks. They were confident no enemy radios were active. Patrols were sent in. Several never returned. Eventually, a wounded Japanese radio operator was captured. His equipment stunned the interrogators. It was compact, carefully sealed against moisture, and almost primitive in appearance. But when tested, it explained everything. The radio transmitted so softly that it barely rose above background noise. The operator explained that he never transmitted for more than a few seconds. He knew that survival depended on discipline. According to interrogation notes, when an Allied officer asked him why their signals were never detected, the operator replied calmly, "Because you were listening for loud voices. We learned to whisper." For Japanese soldiers, these radios were more than machines. They were emotional lifelines. I have read diary entries where soldiers describe the comfort of knowing they were not alone, even when surrounded. A short message from a nearby unit could restore morale, confirm orders, or warn of danger. Psychologically, this mattered deeply. In jungle warfare, isolation kills morale faster than bullets. The invisible radio reduced that isolation. It allowed units to stay connected without exposing themselves. On the Allied side, the effect was deeply unsettling. Signal intelligence officers were trained to trust their equipment. When the equipment reported silence, commanders assumed safety. The Japanese invisible radio broke that assumption. It created uncertainty, doubt, paranoia. Some Allied officers suspected equipment failure. Others suspected betrayal or misinformation. Confidence in radio interception, one of the Allies' greatest advantages, was shaken. When comparing Japanese radios to Allied systems, the difference in philosophy is clear. American radios prioritized power, clarity, and reliability. They were excellent for fast-moving, large-scale operations. British radios emphasized discipline and procedure. Japan, facing constant interception, chose stealth over strength. This choice did not win the war. Japan still suffered from poor logistics, limited industrial capacity, and overwhelming Allied force. But at the small unit level, the invisible radio saved lives again and again. As the war progressed and Japanese forces became increasingly isolated, these radios became even more valuable. Cut-off garrisons used them sparingly, sometimes only once every few days. A single successful transmission could coordinate a counterattack or warn of an incoming landing. By 1945, Allied technology had improved. Receivers became more sensitive. Analysis techniques advanced. The invisible radio advantage slowly faded, but it never disappeared completely. Even in the final months of the war, Allied reports mentioned undetectable Japanese transmissions. Silence was no longer trusted. Looking back now, I believe the Japanese invisible radio represents a forgotten lesson of modern warfare. Not every advantage is loud. Not every victory comes from destruction. Sometimes survival depends on knowing when not to be heard. As I return in my mind to that night in November 1943, I no longer think of silence as emptiness. I think of it as control, discipline, intelligence. In the darkness of the jungle, the Japanese invisible radio did not shout orders. It whispered survival. And for countless soldiers, that whisper meant the difference between life and death.